first and foremost, we want to thank everybody for joining us today. And we want to just start off by just allowing Tom and Josh to do a little bit more of a background and a deep dive on what they're doing at Curebase and AppliedVR, so you have some understanding of what each platform does and where they're both coming from in their background. So I'll let Josh go ahead and start with that conversation first.
I think there's a small chance we lost Josh. Looks like he's doing some tech support, so hopefully he'll turn up. Do you think I should do my intro, Emily, or do you think we should?
Yeah, Tom, if you want to go ahead and start, that would be great.
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. So my name's Tom Lemberg. I'm the founder and CEO at Curebase. What we do at Curebase is we're a full decentralized clinical trial software platform. So where your traditional clinical trials take place more on-site at bigger medical centers, our trials emphasize home participation, where patients can be in a clinical trial from home, and often with community doctors as well. So our platform covers the entire patient journey, from patients identifying trials of interest to screening, consenting, participating. Some of our studies can be months or years long with great retention. And we also have our virtual site business model as well. So we're able to offer things like coordinators, investigators, and other types of virtual staff to do more than just provide the software in a clinical trial. We've worked with close to a dozen different digital therapeutic sponsors. So we've been deeply invested in digital therapeutics since 2018, working with many great companies from bigger sizes to startups. And many of those have gone on to earn things like EUAs, clearances. So we've worked in all types of different objectives with those research and partnered with a lot of great companies. So happy to be talking to the group today.
Great. And Josh, if you want to give us just a little bit of background about yourself and what you're doing at AppliedVR.
Absolutely. Happy to be here with Tom and Emily. I am Josh Sackman. I'm the president and co-founder of AppliedVR. We're the first FDA-approved virtual reality therapeutic for the treatment of chronic low back pain. So we've been in this space since 2015, developing a body of evidence and ultimately taking this through the regulatory pathway so virtual reality therapeutics can be prescribed and soon to be reimbursed the same way other traditional medicines are for the treatment of pain. So very excited to share our experience and how we're working with great partners like Curebase.
Awesome. So we're going to hop into our first question of the day. And first and foremost, we want to just talk about, how do you perceive strategic partnerships in DTx and clinical trial design and execution? And why does it matter to both the sponsor and the partner businesses in going beyond the client-vendor relationship? Josh, I think if you want to take the lead on this and kind of from the business side of things, talk about what it is to come to Curebase and that relationship.
Absolutely. So as we've been paving the way for this new category of virtual reality therapeutics, there are a lot of challenges when it comes to actually how you study and operationalize the research of the type of studies where we're bringing a new novel technology in the home, studying for relatively long periods of time over sometimes 8 weeks, 6 months, 2 years, integrating multiple data sources and trying to engage older patients with technology for long periods of time. And there are tons of research platforms out there, but very few with the teams and technical capabilities and mindset to be able to really lean into the type of research we're doing and jointly want to elevate the field that we're operating in. And so as we're not looking for a typical client-vendor relationship. We're looking for partners with synergies, overlapping long-term visions, and teams that can kind of complement, where we can share and help elevate other companies and vice versa. And so Curebase really embodies that type of relationship where they're at the forefront of innovating in-home decentralized clinical trials with really interesting integrations, data capabilities, really strong staff and team. And so those dynamics really help us think less about how to operationalize and solve the really tactical part of running research. And we can more focus on what are the questions that we need to get answered and working with the right partners to help come up with the right solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tom, I think to his points about the technical side of things and elevating what we bring to the field, can you talk a little bit more about the synergies and how we at Curebase bring those technical sides to another level and notch?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and particularly for digital therapeutics, there's a few things that are really uniquely fit to what we're doing. So first and foremost, digital therapeutics tend to have a strong home-based element. So things like home recruitment, things like electronic consenting over telemedicine, really important for something that is a digital therapeutic study. Another part is that they tend to require very high level of engagement. So if you think of something like a traditional drug study, the patient engagement tends to be around showing up to appointments, taking the medication, and there's not too much more than that. But in a digital therapeutic study, the patient has to be engaged. They have to use the app or the virtual reality technology, oftentimes daily or weekly. There's really a high expectation. And there's often a very long period as well that you need to be retained. Some of the studies we've done have been up to 2 years long, really looking for an effect size for what's often a mental health condition or a pain condition or an addiction condition, something that you really only know if it's valuable over the course of 12 months, 24 months. So our platform is really tailored for that. We have the home engagement certainly as our foundation. We also have a lot of retention capabilities as well. So we work a lot with our sponsors to say, when are we going to re-engage patients to make sure they're still adhering? How are we going to track adherence? How are we going to give our sponsors the knowledge of who's participating actively? Are they using the intervention daily? Are they going to their sessions? And we're proud to say we've had over 95% retention on studies that have been up to 2 years long. And I think that also goes into the collaboration, right? We could give a piece of software to a client and they could start to set up their forms and things like that. But we've never taken the view that software is enough. We like to work with our clients on study design to increase retention, to increase engagement, work with them about when do we engage the patients? Do we send them texts? Do we send them emails? Help them set up dashboards and make sure that they have a right person on their staff who's going to monitor. And if someone's dropping off, if a patient shows lower engagement, who's going to pick up the phone and talk to them? So we collaborate with our sponsors on all of those. We're not just providing the software, we're giving our historical data, our historical expertise, and sometimes even providing staff as well to help with things like those phone calls and all of that.
Awesome. And I want to touch a little bit more and go to the second question on how, and especially talking about collaboration and pushing boundaries and how you two see the relationship that we have with each other. How are we perceiving being able to help each other grow and develop as clinical trial sponsor and partner organization in digital therapeutics? And how exactly are we pushing each other's boundaries and being able to expand and grow together?
I'm curious if Tom shares this perspective. Sometimes by being challenging clients and requesting custom functionality and kind of pushing the scope, ultimately at the end of the day, that ends up elevating the platform and pushing the capabilities of the service and the team and the experience. And so as we're on the forefront of trying to come up with new ways to study and use disparate data sources and asking for custom integrations, we hope that isn't just self-serving to AppliedVR, though Tom may tell me it is, in which case, thank you for putting up with us. But at the same time, we're also hoping that by working together and trying to solve new problems, it also forces our partners to think about ways to diversify or improve their product offering, kind of think about what's next in the roadmap, or maybe just prioritize some functionality that they may have thought may be important, but now there's a reason to start putting some development time and dollars there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, when you're doing something innovative, there's not going to be an off-the-shelf capability that's going to solve all your problems. And, fundamentally, digital therapeutics research is still very innovative. It's obviously becoming more popular and more common, but we're still very much closer to the starting line than we are to the finish line. And I think an example of this would be on some of our early clients, randomization. Randomization is, a very well-studied and researched topic in drug studies, but in digital therapeutics, there's still a lot of invention there. What does it mean to have a control group or a sham group? When you're running an app that's based on coaching, does that mean it's a complete placebo? Does that mean that your digital therapeutic application has an alternate set of video or VR content or something to that tune? So that's something you have to work through, and then it becomes a technical challenge. So when you work with a company like us, we're actually helping to make that a reality, one, on the advising side. So we're taking that input from the sponsor, but we're also saying, okay, maybe we can do this through an integration. Maybe your app can talk to our application, and we can help provision the different types of content. Maybe it's going to be the actual coaching content, or it's going to be the control sham content. So something like that's totally new when it comes out. You also can often only get that confirmation when you go through topics like the pre-submission process or engaging with the ultimate audience for your research, regulators. So there needs to be a collaboration there. There needs to be, at least from our perspective, the ability to take input, to devise solutions together, and then turn that into things that are built with code, integrations, and technical solutions as well. So we've really had that experience. And it's not just randomization, just one example. Across the board, we're always advising and taking advice and working together like that.
There's also a certain flexibility. Over a 2-year study, the capabilities of, in kind of your position, the sponsor, evolve quite a bit. We're constantly hiring and developing new skills to the team. And what I appreciate with great strategic partners is the nature of the relationship can evolve and change over time too. And so while in the beginning, certain skills or competencies may be the most important, 6 months later, we may need something fundamentally different. Or based on our staffing, we may need different types of roles on the project. And so I've always appreciated Curebase's breadth and depth of skills that they can lend to the team, and where they can pull back in certain areas as well as lean into certain areas as our needs are changing over the project.
We've never had a project that didn't change over time. We've never had a project that didn't add additional scope or change us. And that's by design, of course. When you start to launch a study, we, again, help work with sponsors to provide them with dashboards, provide them with insights, and also provide patient feedback as well. So you quickly learn how you can make things better together. And that's only viable if you're working as a partnership and you're able to iterate together.
Absolutely. And I think as we have maybe some audience members that are new to DTx, or if they are just exploring this option in of themselves, what are some of the things in the past where you, that you've learned that are do's and don'ts, and things that have been critical to long-term partnerships and success, or where things haven't been successful and you've seen that partnerships have failed? What are some things to take away and that you've learned in being in this realm for so far?
Tom, do you want to take the first pass?
Yeah, happy to go first. Some things that have really been important and where we've had the most successful relationships have certainly been when the sponsor takes a keen interest in patient experience. Again, especially for digital therapeutics research, if the patient's not engaged, and I'm sure companies in this audience can understand it because they're building application apps, websites, you can have drop off and you can have a poor patient experience that leads to them not wanting to finish the study, or sometimes finishing it the wrong way. So I think that when sponsors are really engaged in testing early and getting patient feedback and taking advantage of some of our feedback and patient feedback options, that's been incredibly valuable. And after a study launches, to really look closely at how those patients are doing. We provide user analytics to our sponsors. We give them input. You can even embed questions into your study if you're proactive about it, to solicit patient feedback at key times at, say, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. You can also look at things like why patients might not be eligible, why they're dropping off. So to really have a partner who wants and has the energy and the commitment to dig deep into that and then make changes, to actually look into that and say, okay, maybe we can refine the way that questions are worded. Maybe we can add or remove an eligibility criteria. Maybe we can do something to really improve the experience, make the engagement, the messaging, notifications better. So I think that when sponsors are engaged with us like that and we're able to move quickly together, that's been incredibly valuable. So that's a pro. Anything you want to say on that, Josh?
Yeah, I would say open, honest, and frequent feedback is probably the most important part of any relationship, but certainly so with a strategic partnership. You know, I can give a compliment, which is I had a question about some project concern, and within 24 hours, Tom and I were on a Zoom able to talk through and a couple things of what, you know, Tom is doing great. One is he was completely plugged into the project. His team had appraised him of where things stand, what's going on, what's the scope of what we're working on at that moment. And we're able to make sure that we're aligned and things were fully handled and taken care of. But the fact that I was able to surface a question, it was immediately received without any defensiveness. And Tom took the time immediately to get on the phone. We had a great conversation, and those types of things really strengthen partnerships. And the same thing that we welcome feedback the other way too. And if there's ever a stage where feedback is not being shared or stuff is getting held back, that's where tension builds up and relationships deteriorate over time. And so good, bad feedback doesn't always mean negative and critical, but having open communication and feedback bilaterally is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting there early as well. I think that a big, corollary to having open, honest feedback is that you're getting there early and proactively so you can act on it. I think that, again, this goes back to, Josh's team has been really proactive about QC, QA, about looking into the patient experience, the site experience, being proactive about that. And I hope long after studies are in progress, the sponsor's obligation then shift towards monitoring. So some of the relationships we've had in the past that are really the most collaborative and successful, the sponsors played a really active role in monitoring, using the data that we're providing them, working proactively to set up the data streams, user analytics, other types of analytics and monitoring to make sure patients are compliant, adherent, and then that way they can raise it to us, demonstrate their accountability, but give it to us early enough that we can also have a conversation about it, adapt as needed, make improvements. So I think there's a corollary there. And when sponsors we have that collaborative relationship, but the sponsors also super proactive about monitoring QC and getting ahead of things. That's when we've had the most success for sure.
Yeah. And then on the don't side, I would say the most problematic partnerships that we've had typically stem from not aligning up front around kind of roles, responsibilities, expectations, timelines, that whenever you engage in anything with ambiguity or misalignment of understanding roles, often that leads to built up frustration, tension, issues down the line. And so we've really learned to have those tough conversations early, including what happens if a project gets derailed and how do we handle things? How do we set up frequent enough communication? And how do we understand each other's teams well enough that we never find any surprises on projects? We're always catching stuff early and communicating or over communicating as needed. And so I think that's been a really important step. We're often, especially for a DTx company that's trying to move quickly, it's really easy to want to jumpstart a project and just dive into details and get going. Taking a breath and establishing that foundation early on pays off hugely, later on when you have to face tough times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can think of tons of examples, who's going to engage with the institutional review board, the IRB. Is it going to be the sponsor or is it going to be the DCT provider like Curebase? We do it both ways sometimes, but to have that clarity and say who's accountable for that, incredibly valuable. Other things like monitoring, if monitoring is going to be delegated to another party, doing something like a transfer of regulatory obligations, critical. So getting everything in writing, whether that's for the purpose of actually transferring obligations or just for assigning accountability. And then if that ever changes, we have a really clear process of just basically increasing scope, doing change orders. And that also works well with Curebase because we do offer, in addition to our software, our virtual site services. So if scope is increasing and we need to add things like a patient caller, a coordinator, a principal investigator, recruitment capability, where we're typically able to do that. But as long as it's clearly scoped, it works out really well.
Yeah. And to the point, I think we've kind of touched base on this next question already, but I kind of want to elaborate a little bit more with you, Tom, and Josh, please feel free to chime in as well. But what software tools are critical when you are selecting your partner, and what in particular, when these collaborations, when you're having these conversations about those tools, make it the most useful for everybody involved?
Sure. And some of these are little but super important tactical things. Like our team uses Slack, and we want to make sure that our partners can tap into the same open communication threads where other people may be on Teams or other systems. And so even aligning whose system do we use? How do we communicate? What's done through Slack versus email versus phone call? Do people like text message communication? There's some really little things, but are incredibly important up front. And we appreciate kind of the adaptability and flexibility for Curebase to tap into what works for AppliedVR, though we try to kind of meet our partners on the other side too, if there's better platforms or systems that we should use. Something we struggle with as a small team that's working on multiple things is we can have one project owner who's running multiple studies. And so to the degree that there's challenges or communication challenges where Curebase isn't hearing back fast enough from our team, then we want to evaluate who else from the team has the information, has access. Can we establish a project team so no single person is ever kind of a weak point or fail point in communication or project management? And so making sure you're empowered to communicate to our full team and have unfettered access, and that there isn't hierarchy and all these barriers and all this bureaucracy, that we facilitate kind of open communication and dialogue. So I'd say that's been really important for our team, and just being able to passively follow the Slack threads that we have in the channel also allows me, who's not connected on a day-to-day, to understand what's going on, what are the challenges, where are we at in the project. And so creating visibility for the full project team and myself has been tremendously helpful. And I think we did a pretty good job kind of setting that precedent early on in the project.
Tom, do you have anything to add to that?
Not too much for me. I mean, we're happy to work with, we've worked well with whatever tools our sponsors need, weekly meetings, project timelines, and then all of the necessary tools to do things like QC, UAT, get that all documented and work through the launch timelines. So
great. And I know that we have only about a few minutes left for these questions until we open it up to the audience for Q&A. So we, as being leaders in this industry, really want to touch base on what are the trends you see currently in trials in DTx space, and where do you see DTx going and expanding in the next few years?
Tom, do you want to go first?
Happy to go first. Yeah, I think that again, we've been working on decentralized trials with DTx companies for since 2018. So we've seen a lot of different things that can benefit from DTx and a lot of different approaches as well. So anything related to cognitive behavioral therapy. Some of our first studies were addiction studies for quitting substance addiction, and they were based on CBT. Anything in the CBT space, I think, can be incredibly benefited from a digital therapy. Obviously, VR is growing, so that can be applied to almost any mental health condition. You think things that were traditionally in a coaching in-person environment, so much opportunity to put that in a context with VR that is immersive, that is more comfortable for the patient, gives them more control over their treatment, and can be equal or more effective. So I think anything related to mental health, neuropsych, pediatrics as well, conditions like childhood autism, there's opportunities there. It's going to be difficult, but moving forward, all of these things, there's opportunities to take what used to be in-person coaching or in-person treatments and try to make them equivalent or better and greater patient experience with elements of DTx, VR, and other parts of home care. So I think all of those areas are growing. There's also so many reasons to run a DTx study. There's, of course, the regulatory one. We've done studies for FDA clearance, studies for FDA submission, but we've also done studies that are meant for getting employers excited, things like targeting employee benefits managers and trying to get enough validation that you can get those sorts of employers to buy into your product as a benefit, or to get an insurance company to reimburse it, or to do remote patient monitoring. So there's so many reasons to run a DTx study. There's so many different neuro, psych, adult, pediatric conditions that can be applied. So I think we're going to see a lot of growth across the board in all those areas.
Great. And one thing I'm seeing, DTx industry at large, the largest challenge that we're facing to advance this space is across reimbursement and business models. Traditionally, running an HEOR study would require an engaged payer who is collecting data within their beneficiary pool and analyzing their own set of data. Now we're in a place where we can leverage, we have a partnership as well with Komodo Health, and we can pull that same data in with Curebase. So not only are we collecting patient-reported outcomes, but we have access to both medical and pharmacy claims data. And so we're not just looking at the impact of our solution on pain and pain interference and the other really critical clinical measures that we're looking at, but we're looking at healthcare resource utilization. We're looking at direct medical costs, and we're looking at things that answer more complicated and even more important questions that help not just advance the science, but also the commercial pathway of products like ours. And so I see more and more kind of this multi-data, decentralized trials where we can leverage stuff from wearables and collect other, objective data points from health kits and different wearable devices. We could bring in great claims data, patient-reported outcome, and a number of disparate data sources through kind of one effective channel that allows us to be able to collect, study, make use, and report out of this data. In the past, that would have been either inaccessible or a nightmare to pull together. Now we have the right partners in the space and the right technology to be able to do this efficiently, which I think will advance this industry greatly because we're answering the right questions for the right stakeholders. And we could do it with a maximized level of control and a lot of efficiencies. And it's not to say there isn't the necessity or room for the traditional research and partnerships of doing this with the payers and through other ways. But this just provides one more tool in the toolkit that allows DTx companies to be able to advance their commercial goals.
Yeah. I'd actually love to riff on that. I think that this dovetails with trends in the clinical trial world in general, which is that as clinical trials become more home-based, more cost-effective with software, they can scale up and do types of trials that would have been prohibitively expensive for all but the most blockbuster drugs in the past. So because we're able to now track patient data largely at home, we can extend the timeline at which we're doing long-term extensions. We've done a number of studies in the DTx space that they have a core period where they track the effectiveness of the intervention in a certain amount of time, say 6 months, but then they check in with the patient 6 months later, 12 months later, 24 months later, to make sure that it's still effective. And especially in the DTx space, what we really care about is long-term outcomes, right? Especially when things are like quitting addiction. It's really important to know, has that person, managed to continue benefiting from the treatment years later? And DTx also so naturally dovetails into health economics as well, and long-term population health, about the improvements we can make. So real-world data is a huge part of that. For the first time, we're now also able to pull in real world data from medical records, from health systems. And these don't need to just be the locations that are traditional research sites. A patient could move over the course of 12 months, 24 months. They could move from the West Coast to the East Coast. So if we're still in a traditional mindset where every piece of research data needs to be collected from a traditional site, it's going to be really, really hard to get that data. So fortunately, we're now in a position where we can scale up these studies, do more long-term extensions, do more things like phase 4s, do more real-world evidence studies, and it's really a valuable thing for our space.
Great. And so I know that we're coming up on time, but I wanted to see if you guys had any final last comments or thoughts around the conversation that we've had today. If there are any questions from the audience that we would like to answer, take the last few minutes to take those as well. But Josh, Tom, any final last thoughts that you have for us today?
The last thought on my side is advancing this DTx space is hard, and it really does take a village, or rather an ecosystem, to bring any one of our products to market. And so I encourage people to think really deeply around who are the key partners that can help materially advance your business. And do you have those partners in place today? And to the degree you don't, how would you approach identifying the right partner for you? And it's been great having access to people like Tom early on in the process, where even if we didn't end up working with Curebase, connecting with other like-minded people who are trying to advance this industry can only help. And if the opportunities don't exist today, they certainly could in the future, and there's a good chance we would have crossed paths. Granted, we did choose Curebase and we love working with them, so that's a great example of, we found a connection right off the bat. But take the time to create connections, reach out, and find who else wants to help you in this space, because we can't do it alone, and there's great people like Tom and the Curebase team who can help us.
Yeah, closing thoughts from Curebase, somewhat in the same note, although a little different. I think that there's a perception sometimes that DTx studies can be, quote, I'm going to do air quotes, easier than drug studies, which in some ways is true because there's less safety risk, but in other ways they're actually a lot harder. So I think that to have a really strong partner that does have experience in that space and who knows how to collaborate with you, not just provide software, but also provide patient experience input, quick adaptability, deep expertise and integrations, knowing about patient engagement and retention, it's even more important in DTx. If patients are dropping off, if they're not engaged, if the experience isn't optimized, you're going to have trouble. And if you're not maintaining the retention to do long-term extensions and get data over a very long period of time, and then also bringing in new types of data like real-world data, wearables, it's going to be difficult. So I think it's really important to have a strong partner and to have a deep collaboration where we have someone who's been working in the DTx space, knows how to solve those problems, and knows how to do it collaboratively.
Yeah, and so we would love to just hear if there's any audience members that have questions for Tom or for Josh. Again, we are really excited about this collaboration and partnership that we have between AppliedVR and Curebase. But curious if there are any questions that the audience has for them.
Looks like there are no questions, but thanks, folks, for an amazing discussion. And it really does sound like AppliedVR and Curebase are pushing the envelope, and not surprised at all. So thanks so much, and thanks for contributing to the dialogue.